The screen opens to an almost palpable shade of gray. The city of Martins Ferry, Ohio, looks like a faded portrait of itself, an open wound in America's industrial heartland. The factory smokestacks, silent for decades, rise like tombstones against a perpetually overcast sky. The wooden houses, with their peeling paint and crooked porches, whisper stories of better times, of a prosperity that is gone and never returned. The air is heavy, laden with the smell of cold metal and the Ohio River, which flows slow and muddy, a silent witness to the decline. It's a place where dreams come to die, where the future seems only a tired repetition of the present. And it is here, in this landscape of stagnation, that my story, or what was left of it, begins. I was at the public library, my only refuge from the silence of my home. The building, with its dark wooden shelves and the familiar smell of old paper, was a sanctuary. Outside, the fine November rain fell relentlessly, washing the dirty streets and reflecting the pale lights of the few lampposts that still worked. The library was the only place in town with free internet access, a window to a world that no longer belonged to me. I came here every week, driven by a ritual of masochism and hope, to type my son's name into the search engine, just to see his face, to have proof that he still existed, even if, to me, he was lost. I sat in front of one of the old computers, the internal fan whirring like an annoying insect. My hands, wrinkled and stained by age and a lifetime dedicated to sewing, trembled slightly as I placed them on the keyboard. I was wearing my best coat, a navy blue one a little frayed at the elbows but clean and pressed. My hair, almost entirely white, was tied in a neat bun, a last attempt to maintain dignity in a world that seemed to have stolen everything from me. My shoulders, stooped not only by my 72 years, but by the weight of an invisible pain, ached with the dampness seeping through the window. Cracks. I typed his name, Daniel Miller. The results appeared instantly, a list of successes and achievements that seemed to belong to a stranger. Articles about his architectural projects, interviews in business magazines, photos of him at gala events, always with an impeccable smile and a suit that probably cost more than my entire year's pension. And then, I saw the link that would make my world implode. It was in a prestigious online society magazine, with a photo of him next to a young, radiant blonde woman. The headline glowed on the screen: "The Wedding of the Year, Visionary Architect Daniel Miller and Heiress Isabella Vanderbilt." My heart gave a painful leap, a mixture of pride and a deep sense of exclusion. I clicked on the link. The page opened with an explosion of color and luxury, a violent contrast to the gray environment of the library. The main photo showed Daniel and his fiancée on a yacht, the sun of some tropical paradise kissing their perfect skin. He looked like a god, a man who had conquered the world. I read the first lines, which described the lavish party that would take place in New York, the illustrious guests, the details of the $50,000 wedding dress. I felt a pang of maternal pride, a stubborn spark that refused to be extinguished. That was my boy, the boy I raised alone, with the sweat of my labor at the sewing machine. I continued reading, my eyes gliding over the polished, fawning text. The article detailed Daniel's meteoric career, his undeniable talent, his rise from humble origins to one of the most respected names of his generation. And that's when I found the sentence that acted like a knife, twisting slowly in my chest. His biography, carefully constructed to inspire admiration and compassion, read, "A self-made man, Daniel Miller overcame the tragic loss of his parents in a teenage car accident, using the pain as fuel to build an empire from scratch." The words danced before my eyes, losing their meaning. The computer's whirring seemed to swell into a deafening roar in my ears. The air grew thin, and I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling. Tragic loss of his parents. I read it again and again. He hadn't just abandoned me, excluded me from his new life. He had killed me. He had buried me in a grave of printed words, so he could be reborn as a tragic orphan, worthy of the compassion and admiration of his new world. The seamstress from Ohio, the mother who mended his clothes, and, worked late into the night to pay for his college, simply no longer existed. A wave of cold ran through my body, so intense it made my teeth chatter. The photos in my house, the memories of his first steps, his birthdays, his graduation, all turned to dust. He hadn't just rewritten his story. He had erased mine. The humiliation was a physical blow, a pain that spread from my stomach to every inch of my being. I was a ghost, a deceitful footnote in his successful biography. The librarian, a kind lady named Martha, looked at me over her glasses, her brow furrowed in concern. I just shook my head, unable to form words. I felt a lump in my throat, a sob that I fought with all my might to swallow. I couldn't break down there, in that public space. With a monumental effort, I closed the web page. Daniel's smiling face disappeared, but the image of his betrayal was seared into my mind. I stood up slowly, my legs weak and trembling. Every step out of the library felt like it weighed a ton. The passive pain I had carried for years, the silent sorrow of abandonment, was transforming into something new, something sharp and cutting. It was the visceral need to prove I was alive. As I pushed open the heavy wooden door and felt the cold November air on my face, a sharp clarity cut through my fog of pain. He would not have the power to erase me. He would not turn my life, my sacrifice, into a convenient lie. In that moment, under the gray Ohio sky, the frail retired seamstress died, and in her place was born a woman with a mission to reclaim her existence. I didn't know how. I had no money or resources, but I was going to that wedding. I was going to New York, and I would look my son in the eye as he lied to the world. The fine rain mixed with the silent tears that finally began to roll down my face, but they weren't just tears of sorrow. There was a new flame in my chest, a spark of fury and determination. His lie, meant to bury me forever, had, in fact, resurrected me. He wanted to be an orphan? Fine. He was going to meet the ghost of his mother, the ghost who refused to stay in her grave. I was not a tragic memory. I was Elena Miller, and the world, especially his world, would know I was still breathing. The walk home felt different. The familiar streets of Martin's Ferry, which once represented my confinement and oblivion, now seemed like the starting point of an inevitable journey. Every step I took on the cracked asphalt was a step toward the truth. The pain hadn't vanished. On the contrary, it was sharper than ever. But now it had a purpose. It was no longer the dead weight of abandonment, but the fuel that would propel me through fear, frailty, and distance. That article wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my fight. As I walked, the image of my old rotary phone on the living room table came to mind. Next to it, a small business card I had kept for months, from a young legal aid lawyer who had given a talk at the Wauia Community Center. At the time, I didn't have the courage to seek him out. Now, I had a reason. Justice, I realized, wasn't about revenge or destruction. It was about the restoration of truth. It was about reclaiming the fundamental right to exist in the memory and history of the person to whom you gave life. The decision was sealed. I wouldn't scream or make a scene. My strength was not in my lungs, but in the quiet truth of my presence. I would show up, dressed in my dignity, and I would stand, tall. My mere existence would be the refutation of his elaborate lie. In that moment, the humiliation in the library transformed. It ceased to be a wound and became armor. I was not the shamed mother of an ungrateful son. I was a woman fighting for the only thing she had left, her identity. And for that, I was willing to fight until the end. Stories like this make us think about our own lives and the people we love. If my journey has already touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the unfolding of this story. And please, comment below from which city or country you are watching me. Knowing where you are from makes me feel less alone in this fight. Back in my house, the silence was an accuser. Every object seemed to scream Daniel's absence. The house, with its modest but impeccably clean furniture, was a shrine to the memory of a son who, as I had just discovered, considered me dead. I ran my fingers over a photograph on the living room wall. In it, an 8-year-old Daniel smiled, a front tooth missing, holding a trophy from a science fair. I remembered that day, the explosion of pride in my chest. I had sewn his little blazer for the ceremony, working into the early hours to make it perfect. Now, looking at that image, a piercing pain shot through me. It was the ghost of a love I believed to be eternal and unconditional. I walked down the hallway, a gallery of our past lives. Daniel at his high school graduation, the first in our family to go to college. Daniel in his first apartment, small and messy, but to him it was a palace. In every photo, I was there. Sometimes just a shadow in the corner, a hand on his shoulder, the proud smile out of focus. I was the invisible foundation upon which he built his life, the ladder he climbed and then kicked away. The house was no longer a home. It had become a museum of my own erasure, a painful testament to every sacrifice I made, now redefined as the effort to create a fictional orphan. The clearest memory was of his departure for university. He had been accepted into a prestigious architecture school, but the scholarship didn't cover everything. I didn't hesitate. I sold my late husband's car, our only valuable asset, and worked double shifts at the textile factory for 2 years, my hands bleeding and my eyes burning with fatigue. I remember handing him an envelope with $15,000 in saved cash, every bill imbued with my sweat and my hopes. "This is for your future, my son," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "Build something beautiful." And he did. He built a life so beautiful there was no longer any room for me in it. The next morning, with my heart hammering against my ribs, I took the yellowed business card from my drawer. "David Chen, Public Interest Law." I dialed the number with trembling fingers, rehearsing the words in my mind. When a young, calm voice answered, I almost gave up. "My name is Elena Miller," I stammered. I think I need help. It's about my son." I made an appointment for the next day, and hanging up the phone felt like the bravest act of my life. It was the first step out of the shadows, an admission that love and patience had run out, giving way to a desperate need for justice. David Chen's office was exactly what I expected. Small, cluttered with file boxes and law books, smelling of strong coffee and dedication. He was young, perhaps not even 30, with a kind face and eyes that truly listened. As I told my story, unraveling years of love, sacrifice, and finally, the abandonment and public humiliation, he didn't interrupt me once. He didn't look at me with pity, but with an empathy that seemed to warm the cold room. He saw beyond the frail old woman. He saw the betrayed mother and the woman who refused to be erased. When I finished, silence hung between us. David picked up a notepad but didn't write anything for a long moment. "Mrs. Miller," he said finally, his voice soft but firm, "what your son has done is not just morally reprehensible, it's potentially fraudulent. The story he has told to promote himself, to integrate into this new family, was built on the erasure of your identity. That is profound emotional damage." He explained the difficulties, the lack of resources, the David and Goliath battle we would face. But in his eyes, I saw a spark. He believed me. "His fiancée's family is one of the wealthiest in New York," David continued, with a note of caution. "They will have the best and most expensive lawyers. They will try to discredit you, to paint you as a senile, greedy old woman who showed up to squeeze money out of a successful son. They will dig into your life, look for anything they can use against you. It will be an ugly battle, Elena. You need to be prepared for it." Every word was a warning, an obstacle raised before me, but strangely, it only strengthened my resolve. I had already lost everything. I had nothing left to fear. "I don't want his money, Mr. Chen," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. "I've lived my whole life with little, and that's not going to change now. What I want back is my story. I want him, in front of those people he lied to admit that his mother is alive, that the woman he buried with words is still breathing. My dignity doesn't have a price, but it has a value, and it's that value I'm fighting for." In that moment, the dynamic between us shifted. We were no longer just a lawyer and a potential client. We were partners in a cause. The nights that followed were a torment. Sleep eluded me, and I would lie in the darkness, waging a war within my own head. A mother's love is a stubborn, irrational force. A part of me still saw the 8-year-old boy who clung to my apron, the teenager who told me his dreams. What if I destroy him? A voice whispered in my mind. What if this humiliation breaks him forever? I loved him, even after everything. But could love coexist with such a colossal betrayal? Answer was painful. Love could not be an excuse for erasure. Love demanded truth. To finance the trip to New York and the initial legal costs, I began to sell what I had left. The first to go was my late husband's gold wristwatch, which I had kept in a velvet box for 40 years. I took it to a pawn shop and felt a part of me drain away as the man tossed it onto a scale. Then I sold my old Singer sewing machine, the very one on which I had made countless dresses and mended Daniel's pants. Each object sold was a small funeral, a necessary sacrifice on the altar of my resurrection. The money I got was little, about $800, but to me, it felt like a fortune. News of my intentions spread through our small town like wildfire. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, brought me a casserole and hugged me, saying I was the bravest woman she knew. But others were not so kind. I heard the whispers at the market, the disapproving glances. What kind of mother does that to her own son? One said. She should be ashamed, trying to ruin his wedding. The social criticism was an added burden, but it also served to show me how little people understand about the pain of being made invisible. David became a constant presence. He would come to my house after work, bringing documents for me to sign and often, just to talk over a cup of tea. He helped me organize the evidence we had. The old bank statements showing the money transfers to Daniel's college account. The letters he used to write me, full of promises that he would take care of me when he became successful. Together, we assembled the puzzle of my life and my sacrifice, turning painful memories into pieces of a lawsuit. The stress began to take its toll. The arthritis in my hands worsened, and an old back pain returned with a vengeance. There were days when climbing the stairs at home was a Herculean task. David, noticing my fragility, insisted I get a checkup. The doctor was clear. A long trip and a high-intensity emotional confrontation posed a significant risk to my heart. Your body is no longer that of a young woman, Elena, he warned me. But my spirit, at that moment, was stronger than my body had ever been. One afternoon, David arrived with a letter-headed envelope from a Manhattan law firm. It was a letter from Daniel's lawyers. They offered me $25,000 in exchange for my absolute silence and the signing of a non-disclosure agreement. The letter also contained a veiled threat, accusing me of harassment and attempted extortion. The offer was an insult, an attempt to buy my identity for a pittance. They truly believed my dignity had such a low price. That expensive piece of paper, with its cold, calculated words, eradicated any doubt I might still have had. Tell them my dignity is not for sale, I told David, pushing the letter back across the kitchen table to him. Tell them I'll see them in New York. A slow smile spread across David's face. He was no longer just doing his job. He was on a crusade. He saw a strength that even I didn't know I possessed. Their attempt at intimidation had failed spectacularly. Instead of silencing me, their letter had given me a louder voice. The battle was no longer just personal. It was about principle. We spent the next few days planning the trip. David used some of his own savings to buy my bus ticket and book a modest hotel room in Queens. Meanwhile, I prepared for the confrontation in my own way. I went to my closet and took out the best dress I owned. A simple navy blue wool dress I had made myself over 20 years ago, for a neighbor's daughter's christening. It was a bit out of fashion, but it was dignified. I spent hours mending a small seam and pressing it carefully. That dress would be my armor. The day of departure arrived, gray and cold. David drove me to the bus station, a noisy, impersonal place. He handed me a folder with copies of all the documents and an official subpoena he had prepared to be served to Daniel. "Call me as soon as you arrive," he said, his expression a mixture of concern and pride. "You are not alone in this, Elena. Remember that." I hugged him, feeling immense gratitude for this young lawyer who had become my ally and my friend. I climbed the steps of the bus, finding a seat by the window. The vehicle smelled of disinfectant and long journeys. Through the window, I watched David wave until he became a tiny dot and disappeared. The bus lurched and began to move, leaving the familiar streets of Martin's Ferry behind. I was on my way to the heart of my son's empire, a world of wealth and power he had built on the ashes of my existence. Fear was a cold presence beside me, but determination was a warm fire in my chest. The Ohio landscape, with its rolling hills and farms, began to pass by. It was a nearly 10-hour journey to New York. For anyone else, it would have been a tiring and monotonous trip. For me, it was a pilgrimage. Every mile traveled took me further from the woman I was, the far, silent victim, and closer to the woman I needed to become. I didn't know what the future held, whether I would be humiliated or heard, but for the first time in a long time, I was in control of my own destiny. Looking at my reflection in the dark glass of the window, I saw the face of an elderly woman, marked by wrinkles of worry and sorrow. But if you looked closely, in my eyes, you would see something new, a flame that refused to be extinguished. I was not traveling to New York to destroy my son's life. I was traveling to reclaim mine. The battle for my memory was about to begin, and I was ready, no matter the cost. The journey stretched into the night. The lights of towns and cars on the highway became a hypnotic blur. I remembered a lullaby I used to sing to Daniel, about a little bird with a broken wing that learned to fly again. On that long, lonely bus ride, I understood that I was that bird. Daniel hadn't just broken my wing, he had torn it off, but somehow I was finding the strength not just to fly, but to soar across the sky and face the storm that awaited me. Finally, the dazzling lights of New York City appeared on the horizon, a labyrinth of skyscrapers piercing the night sky, a monument to the kind of ambition that had cost my son his soul. The city was overwhelming, a giant of concrete and light that made me feel small and insignificant. But I would not be intimidated. I had a truth to tell, and that truth was bigger than any building, richer than any fortune, and brighter than all the city lights combined. I had arrived. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a universe unto itself. Crystal chandeliers, as large as small cars, poured a golden light over a sea of guests dressed in silk and velvet. The sound was a symphony of wealth, the clinking of champagne glasses, restrained laughter, and the soft music of a string quartet. As I entered, accompanied by David, I felt like an ink stain on a Renaissance painting. My simple blue dress, which had seemed so dignified in Ohio, here looked like a uniform of poverty. For an instant, the splendor of the place overwhelmed me, a physical demonstration of the chasm Daniel had dug between us. Every detail, from the polished marble under my feet to the rare orchids adorning each table, was a whisper that I did not belong here. We stopped for a moment near the entrance, hidden behind an imposing column. The fear I thought I had mastered returned like an icy wave. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum in my fragile chest. What if I was wrong? What if, instead of justice, I found only more humiliation? My hand dove into my small purse and my fingers found the aged paper of a photograph. It was Daniel, age 5, dressed as Superman, a red towel tied around his neck. I held it tightly. I was not there to destroy a powerful man. I was there to remind a scared little boy where he came from. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, out of the shadows. No one noticed us at first. We were invisible, two anachronistic figures in the midst of the celebration. We began to move slowly around the perimeter of the room, a silent journey towards the stage where the head tables were arranged. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the complacency of a life without hardship. I saw women with diamond necklaces that could have bought my entire street. I saw men laughing as they held Cuban cigars. For them, this was just another social event. For me, it was the battlefield where the war for my soul would be fought. David walked beside me, his calm, steady presence the only anchor keeping me from being swept away by the tide of anxiety. Then, I saw him. He was on a small stage, next to his bride, who looked like a fairy tale princess. Daniel was impeccable in his tuxedo, his hair perfectly coiffed, the charismatic smile I knew so well lighting up his face. He held a microphone, preparing to make a speech. Seeing him there, so at ease, so radiant in his world of lies, the last pang of hesitation in my heart dissolved, replaced by a glacial calm and an unshakable resolve. The boy in the photograph was completely gone, consumed by the man he had become, and it was that man with whom I needed to settle accounts. He tapped the microphone lightly, and the sound caught everyone's attention. "If I could have your attention for a moment," he began, his voice echoing through the hall with polished confidence. He thanked the guests, praised his bride's beauty, and paid tribute to her family for welcoming him so warmly. "As many of you know," he continued, his tone shifting to a rehearsed solemnity, "my journey to this point has been, in many ways, a solitary one." I felt my stomach clench. The lie was about to be spoken once more, this time to the most important audience of his life. "I grew up learning to rely only on myself," Daniel said, and a few guests nodded with compassion. "Losing my parents so young forged me in the fire of adversity, teaching me that resilience is the greatest of virtues. I would give anything for them to be here today, to see the man I've become, and to meet the incredible woman that is Isabella. But I know they are watching over me, proud." His words, so eloquent and false, hung in the air, and I could feel the crowd's sympathy wrap around him like a protective cloak. It was the masterpiece of his life of deception, and it was my cue. As he spoke, we began our walk. We left the periphery and moved in a straight line, down the central aisle that led to the stage. We didn't rush, but every step was deliberate, heavy with meaning. People began to notice us. Conversations ceased. Heads turned. A murmur rippled through the hall, a wave of curiosity and confusion. Who was this elderly woman in a simple dress, walking with such determination toward the groom? The focus of the room began to shift, away from the speaker and onto the strange, approaching interruption. Daniel, immersed in his own drama, was the last to buy notice. It was the change in his bride's expression that alerted him. He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes following her gaze toward the center of the room. And then, our eyes met. 20 yards separated us, but it felt like an inch. Daniel's charismatic smile froze, shattering like a thin sheet of ice. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a deathly pallor. The microphone in his hand trembled visibly. Time seemed to stop. All the air was sucked out of that magnificent hall. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was an absolute, heavy, awkward silence. The string quartet had stopped playing. The clinking of ice in glasses ceased. More than 200 guests held their breath collectively, their eyes darting between me and the statue of shock on the stage. In that silence, my presence was a scream. My simple blue dress was an affront to the opulence. My wrinkled face was a testament against his story of orphanhood. I didn't have to say a word for the first crack in his perfect world to appear. A waiter, perhaps thinking I was a lost relative who needed to make a toast, pushed a spare microphone stand in my direction. I accepted the silent invitation. My fingers trembled as I touched the cold metal. I brought my lips to the microphone, my heart beating against my ribs like a trapped bird. My voice came out, not as the angry accusation I had rehearsed in my mind, but as a trembling whisper, amplified for all to hear. "Daniel, my son," I said, the words heavy with the weight of a lifetime. "I just wanted you to know, I didn't die. I'm here." A collective gasp swept through the hall. The words, so simple and so devastating, hung in the air. Daniel's bride, Isabella, stared at him, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of shock and questioning. Her father, a powerful man with a stone face, rose slowly from his chair. Daniel remained frozen, his face a mask of panic and humiliation. The truth, in its purest and most undeniable form, had entered the room, and there was no way to escort it out. His carefully built castle of cards was collapsing under the weight of my simple existence. It was then that David stepped forward. With a calmness that contrasted violently with the scene's emotional chaos, he ascended the steps to the stage. He walked to the podium where Daniel stood paralyzed and gently placed the subpoena on it. His voice was clear, professional, but it cut through the silence like a blade. "Daniel Miller, you are being served," he declared. "This is a lawsuit for fraud and emotional damages, citing, among other things, the $15,000 your mother, Elena Miller, provided for the education that launched your career." At that exact moment, as I watched the pure fear and overwhelming shame on my son's face, something inside me broke and healed at the same time. The excruciating pain of abandonment, the humiliation that had consumed me in the library, the weight I had carried on my shoulders for years. It all simply dissipated. It was a liberation. I no longer needed his love. I didn't need his regret. I didn't need his approval. Seeing him there, stripped of his lies, small and exposed, I freed myself from the need to be validated by him. I gave him one last look. There was no hatred in my heart, not even pity. There was only a profound sadness for the loss, not of my life, but of his soul. I was mourning the boy he had been and the man he would never become. I had reclaimed my truth, and that was enough. My power came not from destroying him, but from rebuilding myself, from rising from the ashes where he tried to leave me. I had found my voice, and it no longer needed his permission to be heard. Without another word, I turned. David came down from the stage and placed a steady hand on my back. Together, we walked back down the same central aisle. The crowd parted for us, their faces a mosaic of astonishment and shock. Behind us, the silence was broken. Shouts, accusations, the sound of a breaking glass. The party was over, but I didn't look back. I kept walking, head held high, out of that golden ballroom and into the uncertain light of my own future. The battle was over, and in a way I had never expected, I had won. Leaving the Plaza Hotel and stepping into the New York night was like emerging from a fever dream into the clear, cold air of reality. The chaotic sound of traffic, the distant sirens, and the city's blinding lights enveloped me. But for the first time, I didn't feel intimidated. Instead, I felt a deep, overwhelming peace, like a soldier finally laying down their arms after a long war. The weight I had carried on my shoulders, the burden of being invisible, had been left behind in that golden ballroom. David walked silently beside me, but his presence was an immense comfort. In that moment, under the artificial lights of a city that was not my own, I felt more at home in my own skin than I had in my entire life. The next day, the story exploded. Back in my modest hotel room in Queens, I saw the headlines on the news sites David showed me on his laptop. $1 million wedding canceled after shocking appearance by groom's deceased mother. The reports were sensational, filled with speculation and grainy photos of me leaving the hotel. But as I read about the ruin of Daniel's reputation and the collapse of his perfectly constructed life, I didn't feel an ounce of joy or revenge. I felt only a melancholy relief. The truth, however painful, had found its way. His life of lies was a house of cards, and my mere presence had been the gust of wind that brought it down. Daniel's fall was swift and brutal. The Vanderbilt family, publicly humiliated, not only canceled the wedding but used their immense influence to close every door to him. His business partners abandoned him, and the multi-million-dollar contracts evaporated. In less than a week, he became a pariah. It was then that his lawyers, in a desperate attempt to contain the scandal and avoid an even more damaging public trial, contacted David. The offer they made was far beyond what we had asked for in the lawsuit. It was a substantial sum, a fortune for someone like me, offered in exchange for my perpetual silence. David presented me with the terms of the settlement on our last day in New York. The money was enough for me to live the rest of my days in luxury and comfort. but I looked at the numbers on the page and felt nothing. Money was never the point. However, I saw in those numbers not a prize, but a tool, a seed, an opportunity to transform the ugliness of my pain into something beautiful and lasting. I accept, I told David, but not for me. In that moment, an idea that had been just a whisper in my mind began to take shape, clear and powerful. The bus ride back to Ohio was a journey of transformation. I was no longer the frail, frightened woman who had made the trip out. I was a woman with a purpose, and for the first time in my life, with the means to achieve it. Looking out the window, the gray landscape of my hometown no longer seemed like a symbol of decline, but rather a fertile field. I saw the faces of other elderly people on the streets, faces marked by loneliness and forgetfulness, and I recognized my own story in their eyes. My suffering was not unique. It was an echo of a silent pain experienced by many, and I decided I would no longer be silent. And so, the Living Memory Project was born. The idea was simple but radical: to create a place where the elderly who were abandoned or neglected by their families could find not just shelter, but dignity, support, and community. A place where their stories mattered, where their voices would be heard. A place to prove that a life doesn't end when your children forget to call. I used most of the settlement money to buy an old, abandoned commercial building in downtown Martins Ferry, a place that once symbolized the city's failure. The renovation took 6 months. People from town, who once whispered about me, now showed up to volunteer, inspired by my story. David, seeing that his true calling was not in the courtrooms of New York, but in fighting for people like me, made the surprising decision to move to Ohio and run the legal aid arm of our center. Together, we transformed that skeleton of bricks and broken glass into a beacon of hope, with walls painted in warm colors, comfortable furniture, and windows that let the light pour in. The Living Memory Project opened its doors on a spring morning. At first, people came timidly, but soon the center became the beating heart of our elderly community. We offered free legal counseling to combat financial abuse, emotional support groups, art classes, community lunches, and most importantly, a safe space where no one was invisible. The once silent rooms now echoed with laughter, the sound of card games, and the murmur of conversation. We were restoring not just dignity, but joy. I found my place, not as a director or an administrator, but as an equal. I spent my days pouring coffee, listening to stories of incredible lives the world had forgotten to hear, holding the hand of someone who was having a difficult day. I was no longer Elena Miller, the abandoned mother. I was just Elena, part of a new family, a family bound not by blood, but by the shared experience of being left behind and the mutual decision to lift each other up. Every person I helped was a way of healing. Myself. There was Mr. Petrov, a Russian immigrant whose son had taken his house and put him in a substandard nursing home. With David's help, we sued the son and managed to reverse the situation, ensuring Mr. Petrov could live out his final years in safety and dignity. There was Mrs. Wallace, a woman who hadn't left her house in years due to depression after her husband passed away and her grandchildren moved away. At the center, she rediscovered her love for painting and became our artist in residence. Every small victory was a testament to the power of human connection. Daniel's betrayal taught me the most painful and most valuable lesson of my life. True family is not a birthright, but a privilege earned through respect, truth, and care. Blood makes you related, but loyalty and love make you family. I lost one son, but I gained dozens of brothers, sisters, and friends. I exchanged a love that proved to be conditional and fragile for a community love that was resilient and unshakable. My life, which had seemed to be over, had in fact only just begun. Now, when I look out the window of the center, I see the same Ohio town, with its gray streets and overcast sky. But I no longer see stagnation or despair. I see a community that is learning to care for its own. I see the lit-up beacon of the Living Memory Project, a lighthouse proving that no life is disposable and no story deserves to be erased. I have found a peace that no amount of money could buy. The peace that comes from turning the greatest pain of your life into your greatest purpose. My journey was long and filled with suffering, but it led me to a place of love and meaning I never imagined possible. I didn't erase the memories of my son. Instead, I built a living monument to all the memories that are at risk of being forgotten. Proof that dignity has no price, and that the truth, even if only whispered, will eventually find its way to the light. And that is a legacy far more valuable than any fortune or family name.